Okay, so we have Psalm 35, which is a long psalm of complaint and lament. So lots of lamenting going on, and it is kind of a particular genre called kind of the Psalm of the Accused. So it has a very specific emphasis. And of course, it's ascribed to David, as so many of the Psalms are, but it's in particularly is focused on. It has a kind of a Sitzenleben, or a setting in life around being caught up as an innocent sufferer in court proceedings, or in kind of the accusations being made in village life. That's kind of so. Kind of if the elders of the village, if you get on the wrong side of the elders of the village, things could go very poorly for you. So this is somebody for whom things have gone quite poorly, and he needs God to help him out. So again, so you've begun to has journeyman critics of the Psalms. You now have been trained in the structural criticism of the Psalms. So, what would be, how would you describe verses 1 through 6? What's the kind of the work being done there? Anyone?
Well, it's sort of a description of the enemies, or the people that he the perceived enemies.
Right. Yeah, and we're going to get more description as we move along, and so he's going to start out with asking God to do some things for him, right? So contend. It's like if you circle all these action words: contend, fight, take hold, rise up, draw, as in drawing a spear or a javelin, say, and then the petitions, and then as the petitions from 4 through 6, let them. So it kind of starts out with very vigorous supplication and petition against those who are troubling. We're going to find out kind of a little bit more as we go along what the wicked are up to. But clearly, this is he's in the fight of his life, so to speak. And so, what kind of leaps out at you about the language? Especially at verses, say, 1 through 3, the language of the psalm. What dominates there? Charmaine, I saw you say something. So go ahead and finish. I'm like. See, this is what as a teacher, I have to turn this around on you and say, Charmaine, do you have something to share with the class?
Definitely being vindictive.
Okay, well, all right. So, I think in the sense that he needs vindication, right? He needs to be vindicated, certainly. And so it's in some ways it's much. Yeah, Randy. Yeah.
Didn't he ask him to take violence against him?
Well, so this is that's kind of the metaphor that's being used. Yes.
That's a metaphor, you think, here?
Well, again, we have to remember that the sayer of the psalm is typically, right, the righteous innocent sufferer who finds himself contending alone against the wicked of this world, and that for whom God is the only help. And so the idea is, in a sense, the psalmist asks God to take up shield and buckler and ask God to fight, because in a sense the psalmist can't do it himself, right? If he could, one might think that he'd be tempted to go ahead and do so, right? Like if he could, like the action-oriented Semites, if you could take care of things, well, go ahead and do that, and like chop them into tiny bits where there will be blood and flowing, and it's like, and there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. that if they could take care of business, they would. But in a sense, his back is against the wall, and he needs God to come along and to be his to have the shield and the javelin as kind of an armor bearer, the classic armor bearer who would go in with the king, and he holds his, take up your shield and kind of be my shield man. And take up that javelin, and you can be my javelin thrower. So take them out before they even get close to me. So he's asking God to fight and do unto his enemies. Now, of course, as I keep on, it's like our favorite commentator on the Psalm, or at least mine, Augustine. It's interesting. He takes up the issue of those who fight against me, or in his version of the scriptures, those who persecute me. So it has those who fight against those who persecute me, and you can kind of that's underneath that word for those who it's not just a fighting; it's kind of a pursuing. That your enemy's pursuing you. It's not a fair fight. They're chasing you down like prey, and so the Augustine says, well, who could this be? Who could this possibly be who is persecuting us? And it's funny because Augustine lists off some characters that should be familiar to us. Is like, is it those who because you're living a good life and they're offended by your good life? Are they, and so they're going to come after you because you're righteous and they're wicked and they wish you wouldn't be righteous? And, could it be the people that are just kind of nasty and, and could it be, and so he lists off these positive, could it be your neighbors who are envious of you? He has this great list of people who, and he's speaking to a congregation, right? So he has this list of people who would possibly be persecutors of those in his congregation, and then after listing all these folks off, he says, "Well, that's not actually who it is," and he specifically cites the epistle to the Ephesians in chapter 6 and the famous armor of God passage. And so he says, well, look, here's all this armor stuff. We've got shield and buckler and spear and javelin. And that should remind us of something. And it's of course, it's the apostle says that, we'll have the breastplate of righteousness and the sword of the Spirit. And that we contend not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and the powers of the air. So Augustine very quickly, right from the outset, like in the second paragraph of his sermon on this psalm, tries to shift his congregation's attention away from kind of human opponents and enemies to the demonic and their own sins. And so he wants his congregation to, in a sense, pray this psalm with their own sins as the things that are pursuing them, the temptations that they face. And he's going to work that angle in a couple different ways. For example, in verse 5, let them be like chaff before the wind. And now by the way, where John the Baptist got that. Again, John the Baptist wasn't making that stuff up, John the Baptist was quoting the Psalter and repurposing it along with Isaiah, right? I mean, so John the Baptist quotes it, the voice crying out, and so, he's, and so John the Baptist reaches back to the Psalms and talks about chaff being burned and blown before the wind. St. Augustine says now the chaff are the wicked, and it's like the dust. So instead of chaff, he has dust, which of course, if you grew up in the Midwest, they're very close. You get that grain dust from the mills. And he says, so the wicked are like the dust, and wind is temptation. It's like the evil spirit, that evil breath blowing on you. And see, the righteous stand fast against the wind of temptation, But what does wind do with the dust? Why, it picks them up and tosses them about, and so the wicked are, like chaff, are tossed before the wind, and we all know that the wicked give into their temptations, and so there it's like, and then he'll kind of be like QED. It's like, okay, we're moving along. See, there it is. So it's just really funny how, again, in a different cultural mode, how Augustine makes use of the Psalms, where every line of the Psalms is an opportunity for moral exhortation of his congregation. But again, I think that the Lord who says to my soul, I am your salvation. And of course, this is going to have a Christological, interpretation for the church. And in a sense, this is, God who rises up in the person of Jesus to say to our soul, I am your salvation. Let them be put to shame and dishonor who seek after my life. The English has off the Hebrew has life. St. Augustine off the Greek had soul. So those who seek after my psyche, after my soul, let them be turned back and confounded who devise evil against me. Then let them be like chaff before the wind with the angel of the Lord driving them on. Let their way be dark and slippery with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. So it's kind of basically, if you have the pursuit of verse 6 with the pursuit of verse 1, fight against those who persecute or pursue me, you have this idea, it's like the tables that in God's mercy, the tables will be turned on the pursuers, on the persecutors. And verse 5 and 6 it kind of has some resonances, and it's a kind of an Exodus allusion, especially with the angel of the Lord. That whenever you kind of with the angel of the Lord driving them, and it's like you have to and the thing about the cinematography of the Exodus. If you think about all the different Exodus movies, from Cecil B. DeMille to the to some of the recent ones, you have this idea of the kind of the Egyptians being driven on, and that's very much within the rabbinic glosses on that Exodus story. That in a sense, in the rabbinic glosses, that is, they would add the commentary and details to the kind of bare bones of the scriptural narrative, and in a sense, it's like God is pushing the Egyptians into the Red Sea from behind. In a sense, the Egyptians think they're pursuing the Israelites, but it's really God pushing them into that slippery, and the rabbis talk about the slippery rocks at the bottom of the Red Sea, because after all, it was underwater the whole time. And we all know that when we go to the ocean or by the Sea of Galilee, those rocks are slick when they're wet. And so you just have to imagine the chariots of Pharaoh going over the bedrock of the Red Sea and sliding all over the place. So this part of the psalm is in some ways is referencing kind of Exodus allusions through the rabbinic elaborations of that story, with the angel Lord being a main character in the Egyptian in what happens to the Egyptian army. Of course, in the biblical narrative, it's just an angel of the Lord kind of puts himself in between the Egyptian army and the Israelites while they're crossing the Red Sea, and then goes away and allows the Egyptians to come in. But the rabbis thought there was much more work for the angel of the Lord to be doing. And they delighted in telling the stories. Now, of course, we have to remember that these are the stories of an oppressed, persecuted people. Right? So it comes off a little different when you're the underdog to tell these stories. So that's the verses 1 through 6, and so we move on into verse 7. So kind of with verse 7, we have a change. So what would be, so as we get with verse 7, what's the first, how does this function? What's this doing now? Right, good, yes. So we have the complaint and the provocation. So without a cause, they set their net for me. Without cause, they dug a pit for my life. And then in verse 8, you have a renewed petition, right? So now in verse 8, you have, so we had one long string of petitions from verses 1 through 6. And then we're going to give you a little bit, then you get a little bit of a hint about what they're up to. And of course, the cause is kind of a legal cause. Like, you know, do you have a cause for the filing? It's a very formal forensic kind of connotation. So it's without in a sense, in other words, I didn't do anything wrong. You know, I'm innocent. This is baseless. These charges are baseless. There's no cause. But they've dug a pit for my life. They want to throw me into Sheol, and they want to kill me. And so then we have another petition. Let ruin come upon them unawares, and let the net that they hid ensnare them. Let them fall in it, to their, in the Hebrew, to their shoah, which if those of you who know the Hebrew word for the Holocaust is the shoah, the ruin or the utter destruction or devastation. And so this says, let them fall in it to their shoah, to their utter ruin and devastation. And so what I like to say, this is a mirror image petition, because it's asking God, right, to basically turn, again, do to them, basically, it's kind of a negative version of the golden rule. It's like, do to them what they want to do to me is the basic request that's being made here. The ruin the net that they hid, ensnare them. And again, in the one of the ways in which the church has read this, in a sense, and also I think it rings with, you know, in a sense, our hope for justice is that, in a sense, that the old phrase, to be hoist by your own petard, you know, then in a sense that that by the very plans that you make, those are the things that are going to get you in the end. And so Augustine uses the image of somebody who digs a hole in a pit for someone else to fall into and covers it over, and then they go out at night forgetting where they dug it and fall into it themselves. It's like, that's justice for you. That's what God is going to do to the wicked. And now, of course, as ultimately, which is something that Augustine wasn't so sharp on, but the Hebrews, the Semites, certainly are, is that, in a sense, this sort of justice is often delayed, and is something that we won't be seeing in this life. And so you have, in a sense, the eschatological vision is going to come in later. So then in verse 9, it's a different. So in verse 9, in 9 and 10, we have something different, a different sort of work. So what would be verse 9 and 10? What's that kind of? We've had petition or supplication. We've had the provocation or the complaint, and then we've had another petition, and then now what do we have in 9 and 10?
Eric is too fast for us.
I'm sorry?
Eric is too fast for the rest of us.
Oh,
yay,
goodness.
Eric.
It's like, boom, it's got you on the chat. So it says, right, thanksgiving or praise, a confession of faith, then my soul shall rejoice in the Lord, exulting in his deliverance. All my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you? And that's that line, O Lord, who is like you, is a direct quote from Exodus 15, verse 11. So again, it's another tie-in to the Exodus story. And again, that what we see the psalmist doing, which is something that we can, as the people of God, we're called, in a sense, to personalize and appropriate the salvation narrative for ourselves, right? In a sense, what this complainant is doing, what this psalmist is doing, is saying, I need my own personal exodus event. I need to be delivered from an opposition, a power that is too big for me to handle. And so Lord, I need you to do that kind of Red Sea destruction of the enemy kind of stuff. And ultimately that's, so again, and that's really the nature of Christian preaching, right? In a sense that we need God to kind of do that bringing out of the tomb stuff in our lives. And we appropriate that event, that saving event of Jesus's life, which itself is in some ways a recapitulation and intensification of the corporate experience of the Red Sea into one individual, Jesus, who brings all of Israel into himself on the cross. And all my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you? You deliver the weak from those too strong for them, the weak and needy from those who despoil them. And so again, that's using that corporate language of salvation and Israel's story to kind of say, hey, listen, I'm a part of this people too. So don't let this story, my personal story, end differently from the story of Israel. That's the kind of the confession and the praise that's going on here. Of course, it's also a confession of faith in the sense that from the point of view of the psalmist, this hasn't happened yet. So it's kind of like, you deliver the weak from those too strong for them. So the psalmist saying, that is the kind of God you are, and that's what I'm going to depend upon in singing this psalm. So then in verses 11 through 16, what would be the again, so this is going to be something, it's a long enough psalm that we're going to have things repeated. And so what would be the verses 11 through 16?
More complaints.
Right. So an expanded complaint or provocation, along with the expanded description of the wicked. So again, the psalmist loves to describe the details of the conduct of the wicked. And so this is going to be yet a new kind of wicked person for us to encounter in the psalm. Malicious witnesses rise up. Again, that's the forensic or the courtroom kind of context. They ask me about things I do not know. They repay me evil for good. My soul is forlorn. But as for me, when they were sick, I wore sackcloth. I afflicted myself with fasting. I prayed with head bowed on my bosom as though I grieved for a friend or a brother. I went about as one who laments for a mother, bowed down and in mourning. And then they, at my stumbling, they gathered in glee. They gathered together against me. Ruffians, whom I did not know, tore at me without ceasing. They impiously mocked more and more, gnashing at me with their teeth. So for you all, what kind of jumps out at you in terms of this, the language of this expanded complaint and provocation?
Unjust he feels.
How what? I'm sorry?
How unjust their behavior feels towards him. It
Right.
seems to be very much they repay me evil for good. Look at what I did for them, and then this is what they did for me. So
Yeah,
it seems
right.
to be a little bit more it seems to be more like, hey, I'm trying to be good here and be a good neighbor, and they're not.
Indeed. And so, yes, and again, in village culture, neighborliness, solidarity with those who suffer is a key virtue. I mean, that's what makes village life work. And, that people are called to share their lives together in solidarity. And this is, their behavior is an affront to the code of village solidarity, really, and it's a betrayal. And that, yeah, you get this deep sense of personal betrayal. Like, listen, I've been playing my role, you know, in the village. I've been holding up my part, and kind of standing in solidarity with them. But now when I've kind of hit the skids, instead of helping me out, the sharks are circling. You know, they're circling with this. They smell blood in the water. Yeah, so that's in a sense it's an acknowledgement. The psalm is an acknowledgement of the human reality that the mercy of the righteous is often met with ruthlessness. Right? In a sense, that the mercy of the righteous is met in a sense with as an opportunity to respond with kind of underhand and violence. And so again, not only this is a psalm of the accused, it's also a psalm of the betrayed. You know, and so again, we lean into these psalms when when we have felt personally betrayed by others. And so this psalm really speaks to that reality in a very frank and heartfelt way. So again, this is the in a sense the gift of the Psalms, which when you take them in their entirety, really cover the experience of human suffering in its many facets. And so the particular facet that this psalm is really dwelling on is the facet of personal betrayal and public isolation, like kind of being the odd man out, and therefore feel the vulnerability of one who is not loses the safety of the group. So what else in this? What else in these verses? Does anybody else have some response to verses 11 through 16? All right. Okay. Well, so then we have verses 17 through 18. And so now we go back to something else. So what would be 17 and 18? So Charmaine?
How long are you going to let it keep on going? So it's a complaint.
Right. Good. So you have another complaint, which then bridges immediately into what?
Then I'm going to thank you.
Exactly. Right. Good. So in a sense, the psalmist, is doing the psalmist is kind of doing the please and thank you, both sides of the conversation. It's kind of please, we give me this, and thank you for having given this to me. And so, right, you have an immediate transition from the complaint into a thanksgiving that, kind of in a confession of faith. And again, whenever the praise is put in the future tense, it requires a confession of faith, right? If I will, it means I'm saying, right. He will thank, but is maybe holding off for a little bit. Then I will thank you, right? It's like, I'll get around to thanking you when you get me out of this jam. Absolutely, there's a certain sense of that. And again, remember the psalm where it says, will do those in Sheol sing your praises, God? The answer to that is no, they don't. And so you ought to save me so I can sing your praises. That's the trade-off that goes back and forth there. So yes, how long? And that's the classic. That is the classic cry of the Psalter. Really, how long? How long? How much longer will this go on? Will you look on? Rescue me from their ravages, my life from the lions. And once again, so the lions are, you have that's a kind of a wilderness, wilderness metaphor. So the, kind of the being in the desert, where the lions are out there. And again, we just have to imagine that like lions were actually, that was like a thing. Back then, I mean, that was like, that could happen to you, you know, like Philmont, maybe, you know, like you had if you left your food out, maybe a bear would come by and try to get your spaghetti or something, or, you know, your nutrition bars. But in the time of the psalmist, like, you know, lions really could come out and get you. You had to, you know, you had to be careful. And certainly if you had sheep about, that was like a lion magnet. You know, it's like trying to be a shepherd. That's why you had all those, you know, that staff and all those, that sling with the stones. Then I will thank you in the great congregation, in the mighty throng. I will praise you. So it's not just praise here, but it's also a commitment on the part of the psalmist to publicly witness to God's victory that has been won. Right? It's a commitment to say, you know, I will testify in a sense, it uses that forensic, so that it's a forensic, I'm going to testify in a forensic sense to your goodness since you're backing me up, you know, in this court case, I'll back you up in the court case of in a sense, all your reputation amongst the whole people, and I will be one of your spokesmen for your goodness. When, of course, you deliver me. Let me, and it's kind of, Lord, let me be exhibit A of your mercy and goodness. And so that's the part of the request. So then in verses 19 through 21, what's happening there?
Another complaint.
Yes, he's not done yet. He's not done complaining, right? It's like, let's go back. It's like, I have it. It's like, oh, by the way, it's kind of like Columbo, you know, it's like, you know, for those of you like Peter Falk, you know, just one more thing, you know, it's like, oh God, I might have forgotten to mention that my enemies are treacherous. Do not let my treacherous enemies rejoice over me. For those who hate me without cause, wink the eye. Again, clearly, there are some conspiratorial glances that have been with the human for a long time. So kind of people winking at each other behind someone's back evidently is something that's been with us for a very long time. So don't let those who hate me wink the eye, for they do not speak peace, but they conceive deceitful words against those who are quiet in the land. They open wide their mouths against me. They say, aha, aha, our eyes have seen it, which is it's the false witness. I saw so-and-so doing such and such, and they're all in it together. You know, I always think of the quintessential tale of the power and the damage that false witnesses can do, which is Naboth's vineyard, and how, you know, poor old Naboth, he's got his family farm, and King Ahab wants it, and he can't, and Naboth doesn't want to sell it to him, and Ahab starts, you know, is kind of, you know, whining about it, and Jezebel says, you know, you're the king, you know, like, we can take care of this. And so she goes out and bribes two rough fellows to create a false witness against Naboth that he blasphemed against the Lord. And so then they execute Naboth, and Ahab gets his vineyard. And so that little story in the Book of Kings is, in some ways, really encapsulates the danger that can be faced when you have people who are willing to, you know, to lie. I think in kind of modern court proceedings, I was reading an article about how, you know, DAs, district attorneys, is basically because of all the crime process dramas that are on TV all the time, that all juries expect to have basically DNA evidence. Like they you know, well, if there's a crime, certainly there's like, because didn't you have like a lab and you put, you know, like, it's like, that doesn't happen all the time. That's TV. You know, like sometimes all you have is somebody saying, I saw so-and-so do that. And of course, that can be abused and has been abused when you have to rely on eyewitness testimony. So this is someone who's at the receiving end of false accusations. And, you know, he say basically, I'm trying to mind my own business. I'm among those who are quiet in the land. I'm not trying to, you know, I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I'm just trying to kind of do my thing as an Israelite. So yes, so it's another complaint and another description of the wicked and what the wicked are up to. And so if you were, so let's play the St. Augustine game. So if you were St. Augustine, and, you know, I've been trying to train you in seeing the Psalms through St. Augustine's eyes. So if you were St. Augustine, how would you interpret verses 19 through 21? You know, how would you riff on this in a Christological vein?
Really do it through 21.
Right. So what would be a so if we spiritualize this, what would be, you know, what would be going on with, do not let my treacherous enemies rejoice over me, or those who hate me without cause wink their eye.
Those are possessed by the evil spirit. Augustine is all about spirit.
Okay, good. So that would be a way of talking about, you know, you know, our oppression by the diabolical as the treacherous enemy. Of course, in Augustine, right? Augustine would, whenever he sees something like a treacherous enemy, of course he would think of Satan, and so don't let Satan rejoice over me. You know, save me from his power. And of course, the Satan is is Hebrew for the accuser. So if this is a psalm of the accused, it would be the Satan who would open wide his mouth and say, "Aha! I've seen him do it." And ultimately, it is Jesus who rescues us in a sense, that forensic setting with the Father, who rescues our reputation against the false accusations, or even sometimes the true accusations of the Satan against us, and overcomes the witnesses that are against us in the court of our own salvation. What would be some other ways to riff on this?
Could it also be kind of like an admonition? Be careful who you listen to. And
right. Okay. Go on.
Be careful. You know, those who wink the eye, who are, you know, saying false things. Be careful who you believe. Right. Right. Kind of taking it to like a false prophet or.
Mm-hmm. Good. So they do not speak peace, and who are the ones who don't speak peace but the heretics? So yes, so heretics and those who do not believe in the truth do not speak the peace, and because only Christ himself is our peace. And if you speak against Christ, of course, so be you a heretic or a pagan. And of course, in Augustine's day, there were still pagans about. They were kind of waning, but they were still out there. There were pockets of not so much in North Africa. Actually, North Africa was a much more heavily Christianized part of the empire in the time of Augustine than the mainland of Italy. And in a sense, paganism actually began to retreat into the, you had kind of a popular paganism, but you also had senatorial paganism. So you kind of had some of the old families, the old aristocratic families, kind of held on to their family gods, and supported for example, the Vestal Virgins were still a problem with when Archbishop Ambrose of Milan tried to get the Christian emperor to say, you got to, you know, emperor, you got to do something about those Vestal Virgins. It's like, that's paganism, and it's in your own city. You got to do something about it. And kind of the emperor's response is, you know, There's senatorial families, we can. So, right. So those who conceive deceitful words or lies about Jesus and his divinity, against those who, of course, are the quiet, which would be those who are quiet in prayer. So yes, that would be an Augustinian way to riff on this. And of course, Augustine, and then in the actual sermon which he preaches, Augustine is also wants to bring attention to the drama of the passion itself, right? So in terms of Jesus's own passion, and so he will also present this part of the psalm as a prediction of the passion. And so for St. Augustine, the parts of the Psalter that again speak of innocent suffering and the righteous sufferer are just as much are just as solidly about the passion as my God, why hast thou forsaken me, right? Or they cast lots for my clothing, and those other proof texts which are more familiar to us because they're used in the Gospels. But for Augustine, again, the entire Old Testament, and especially the Psalter, speak directly of Christ, and in particular of Jesus's passion. And so Augustine spends a lot of time around, again, that you can just see him apply this to Caiaphas and the high priests mocking Jesus on the cross, saying, he said that he would be, that he could tear down the temple. Let's see you come down off that cross, Messiah. And so he of course makes those connections with the Psalms. Yes, Jenny.
You just answered it.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. All right. Yeah, Randy.
In the example you gave of the king that took the man's property, didn't he have some negative consequences arise out of that?
Well, only after a while. It didn't help poor Naboth.
No,
but,
not Naboth, but
yes, Ahab is ultimately, Elijah gets a hold of that, and Ahab loses and is killed in battle, and they send his, and it's particularly, it's just Semitically gruesome in all the wonderful ways that those Old Testament stories are, and so basically he's pierced by an arrow and he kind of bleeds out in his chariot, and so they're washing the chariot with water. His servants are trying to wash the blood, and so the dogs come and lick up the blood around the chariot, and that's of course that's poetic justice. And then
so my point is, if somebody had asked for justice on that person's part, they kind of got it in that example.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And is there a actual Augustine translation of the Psalms, or are they just the speeches he gave?
No, it's just these sermons, and basically he's in a sense, I'm basically copying Augustine in that what he does in his sermons is he'll read them line for line, and he'll read the verse, and then he'll comment on it, and then he'll give the other verses in the Bible that it reminds him of, and he does that for a paragraph or so, and then he'll read off another verse, and so he literally goes through it line by line, and that's the only way I know that, because the text of his sermon has the translation that he's using in it. I can see what text of Augustine goes from Greek Old Testament Psalms into Latin, in which the language in which Augustine spoke, into English. So that's is a couple steps removed versus your typical Bible that you have, which is straight from the Hebrew into English directly. And so by skipping those two steps, we get some differences in what we hear versus what Augustine had. Jenny.
So Augustine, in all of the Psalms that he preached on them from the perspective of this was written about the suffering servant. Like there's a Psalm that is the suffering servant, but he can tie he's tying the suffering servant, i.e. the resurrection and the crucifixion and resurrection, into every Psalm.
Absolutely. If it's there, well, and of course we're, we have kind of a slanted pool that we're working with, because our Sunday Psalter is typically heavy with praise. And so Augustine worked with the praise Psalms too. And he, and he works about how the Psalms are praising various aspects of Christ's divinity and his glory and all that stuff. But we've been working, again, mainly with the things that are left out on Sundays, which are the laments, especially the individual laments. I wonder if maybe we don't read this in church because we don't want necessarily people looking at the other people in the pews and thinking these thoughts. So it's best not to read this in front of the children. And, we save these for the adults later. So, because, I remember what she did. So, we don't say the individual laments in church. But so that's how Augustine will always press the Psalms out of their original context and referent into something that he felt was more appropriate for Christians to use. So then in verse 22, we're going to have a repeated kind of what would you call it? A repeated thematic move here. What would that be?
Petition.
Yes, good. Petition. And so, yes, we're going to close with an expanded petition. Just as we had an expanded description of the wicked, so now that will be balanced out with an expanded petition. You have, and you see the link with verse 21, how verse 21 ends with, aha, aha, our eyes have seen it, meaning the eyes of the false witnesses. And then look at what the psalmist does in verse 22. You have seen, O Lord. The psalmist calls upon God as my witness, right? As God who ultimately will vindicate. Yes, indeed, it's an indictment of, I agree, an indictment of the status quo in his village, and the power dynamics in which the righteous sufferer lives. But in a sense, God is the ultimate witness, right? God has seen what actually happened. God has seen his righteousness. So if you've seen, O Lord, and it's kind of like, I know you know it, God, I know you know what's happening, God. I know you've seen it. So therefore, do not be silenced. O Lord, do not be far from me. Wake up, bestir yourself for my defense, for my cause, my God and my Lord. And that's just like ding, 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 ding. And it's like whenever we, it's like a pinball game and the ball bounces against like one of the things that causes lights to flash. So this is almost a direct quote in John chapter 20, verse 28. Thomas, put your hands into my side, feel where the marks of the nails. And Thomas said, my Lord and my God. So this is a kind of a direct quote from Psalm 35 in the gospel. And of course, now as Thomas is now applied to Jesus himself. And now Jesus is the one who has woken up, right? He's been raised up from the sleep of death. He has vindicated the cause of God against death itself. And so Thomas acknowledges him as my Lord and my God. Vindicate me, O Lord my God, according to your righteousness or covenant faithfulness. Do not let them rejoice over me. Do not let them say to themselves, aha, we have our heart's desire. Do not let them say, we have swallowed you up. And it's like that, again, it's a classic Semitic idiom. Kind of, again, the death is kind of this maw. It's kind of like, it's like, the pit swallowing the living and pulling them into the darkness of death. So do not let them say, we have swallowed you up. Let all those who rejoice in my calamity be put to shame and confusion. Let those who exalt themselves against me be clothed with shame and dishonor. So what kind of jumps out at you all in this kind of final petition in the psalm?
So you get back to the construction. Let them. Are there 3 of them? No, there's 4. Oh well. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5. So it's stronger than it was in the beginning, because there's 5. There's 5 of them instead of 4.
Right. Exactly. It's a dramatic conclusion.
4 or 5. Yeah, 5 of them.
Yes. Let them not. Yes.
Oh no, there are 4. Wait a minute. There's 4, because the last let them is not the same. Doesn't do the same thing.
Oh, okay. You're counting like verse 26
So
there. Let all of us.
When you're saying let them do this and let them do that, so there's 4 of them in the beginning. There's 4 of them here, and then there's a 5th one. And the reader, or the hearer, might think that if the 5th one is sort of the climactic one is positive. So let them who delight in my righteousness shout for joy. So
Yes.
he turns it around, and what you might be expecting becomes something that God is actually doing.
Yes, exactly. So yes, so he turns from God's action on the wicked to God's action on behalf of the righteous. And so, in a sense, we have for the first time at the end of the psalm in verse 27 the idea that some sort of hint that the righteous suffer seems to be connected with the community of the righteous, right? That there are other righteous people out there, but they're powerless. And so he asks that in vindicating his own case, that in a sense, the whole community of the righteous would win through the victory or his own deliverance from the power of the wicked. And so yes, when the wicked are destroyed, all the righteous win. Another way to put it. Yes, Jenny.
He ends it in verse 28 with another future. Then my tongue shall tell of your righteousness. It goes to the future again. Right.
So it's all kind of the praise and the deliverance is all back-ended. It's all in the future tense. Has a hope for deliverance and for victory. And so, right. So what else? What other things you see going on in the text? As we conclude, kind of from 22 to the end.
It follows the same pattern as the previous ones, because it definitely goes from me to us.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Good. That's a classic move on the psalmist's part. Again, yes, to expand the circle, so to speak, to expand the reference to the entire people of God and all the righteous together. Right. What else? Yeah, right.
And this is more of a question than I don't know if it was, even when we were doing the Bible study actually at the parlor.
Okay.
Might have been a long time ago. I forgot in one of the teachings was that I thought we were supposed to say, since we know we're going to be taken care of, when we pray, we're supposed to give thanks for the fact that we're going to be taken care of, even though maybe we hadn't yet. Now, this seems inconsistent when I had read it earlier. That's why with that, because this one's saying, if when you take care of it, I'm going to, be positive.
Mm-hmm.
Base here a little.
I mean, ultimately, it's just how one phrases one's trust in the Lord.
Okay.
In a sense that that let those who desire my vindication shout for joy and be glad and say forevermore, great is the Lord who delights in the welfare of his servant. Then my tongue shall tell of your righteousness and of your praise all the day long. So in a sense, it's describing the preferred future.
Okay.
And it's trusting in God's power but again, it's kind of naming what God has to do for that future to take shape. God has to handle the wicked. God has to handle injustice. God has to handle oppression, because those who are oppressed, the weak and the vulnerable, the sufferer, cannot do it themselves. And so since the lament is a kind of, again, is a genre in which, in a sense, we tell God what God really needs to be doing, so that
That's what I'm thinking here.
Right, yeah, and then we tell, and then we remind ourselves, we remind God to do what God is to be doing, and then we remind ourselves to do what we ought to be doing, which is to be singing his praise and telling of his righteousness all the day long. That is our vocation, right? And so it's kind of the lament is something that reminds God of God's vocation, of what God is supposed to be doing, and it reminds us of us to be doing. And that's the in a sense, the lament, the Hebrew lament is one in which it really takes the human need for God, yearning for God. It's really on to God, of where we're coming from when we're in the midst of suffering. And and that this idea in this quote, great is the Lord who delights in the welfare of his servant. And that God's greatness is shown through, and this is a biblical theme. This is something that resounds through the witness of the Old and New Testaments, that God's greatness is shown precisely in the delight he has in small ones and the vulnerable ones, in his servants. And that his greatness is shown in his mercy to those who are weak and to those who need him the most. So that, again, it's almost like a even within the psalm, a song, it's like quotes it's like a song that quotes another song. It's you have these quotes around, great is the Lord who delights in the welfare of your servant. It's almost like I'll sing that psalm instead of this one, Lord. Like I'll go to a psalm of praise instead of a psalm of lament, and it the psalmist almost reminds himself that there are those other kinds of psalms that he can sing and has in the past. And just to close with this, my tongue shall tell of your righteousness and of your praise all day long. And it's that it's the idea, you have St. Paul's, I think this is the at the root of St. Paul in Thessalonians, pray without ceasing. And I think in Philippians, rejoice always. Again, I will say rejoice. That is psalmody language coming through in Paul. And so Paul gets kind of the most like the Psalms when he's starting to close his letters and give those injunctions, especially in both Philippians and Thessalonians, he's writing to suffering Christian communities. Both those communities, it says, kind of Corinthians and Galatians are the troublemakers. Like they're the people that he's got issues with. But Philippians and Thessalonians are the communities that Paul is, in a sense, saying, hey, keep it up. You're doing great. I love you. And, God is going to help you out. So how appropriate then that towards the end of both those letters, of Philippians and Thessalonians, you have this kind of psalmistic injunction to rejoice and to pray without ceasing. Augustine, we know from the text of the psalm, his sermon on Psalm 35, and again, it's really funny because we have this evidence that he seemed to have worked on this as a project, again, over time, and he starts out the psalm recognizing his fellow bishops, and which is he doesn't have that in all of his, most of his texts. He just kind of starts out with someone. So the editor actually writes a note saying this was evidently preached at a council of bishops. And so it's kind of like, again, Augustine was recognized as a genius in his time by the other bishops as a teacher and a theologian. And so, of course, Augustine was going to preach to a council of his fellow bishops. And so it's kind of like, what project? It's kind of like he's working on the next chapter of his book. It's like, let me do this chapter for you. So it's a classic professorial move. You convert a series of lectures into a few chapters of your book. And so that's what Augustine does. And he notes in his last paragraph, it's really funny. I really identify with it. He says, my tongue shall tell of your righteousness and your praise all the day long. And he says, I know that you are weary. Alas, I have gone all day long. And so it is now time for me to close. And so if you grow fatigued, how shall you praise God? Well, sing a hymn and you're praising God, and do your work and you're praising God, and don't cheat people. And so he kind of wraps it up saying, hey, I know you've been sitting for a long time. So when you go out, you can all praise God by just kind of, doing Christian stuff out there in the world. So it's really a delightful acknowledgement that he has really been going on for a while, and even bishops can only take so much.
And so there's a book. He has there's a codification of these sermons.
Yes, yeah. There's a big volume it's called the Ante and Post Nicene Fathers, and they're about it's one of those things that you see in like theological libraries. And I had a parishioner in my first parish when I was a curate give me the set. It's kind of like when you gave a graduate Encyclopedia Britannica, and so back in those days. And so, it's got a whole bunch of,
okay.
Yeah, so it's got a whole big book just on the Psalms.
So,
yes, so one last thing. In verse 14, there's reference to a mother's or deliberate thematic use of references to a mother across the Psalter. Not really. This is actually a fairly unique kind of referent, and so that's it's kind of like like when you were hurt, I grieved as if my own mother had died, and has an expression of extreme solidarity and kind of making the case that, hey, I was grieving with you, but you guys are tossing me to the wolves. So, all right, well, very good. It's great to see you all. Okay, so Psalm 37, and I said that we wouldn't do Psalms that have where part of it, but Psalm 37, there's so many good parts of it, and we only do on Sundays the first 12 verses. So there's lots of great stuff in Psalm 37. So we're going to go ahead and do Psalm 37. And so that'll be our work for next week. All right? All right, good. We'll see you all next week. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.